My idea with the deck is what you said about creating a safe space or a sacred space. The deck itself is not a doctrine, it's not a dogma. I see it as a language or way of talking about these things, but it's also a platform within which people can engage in these experiences, give names to aspects of their own experience. That's what's really important about the language. It's a way people can get a grasp on the important, volatile aspects of their emotional, intuitive, and sacred experiences. Because there's a language that's shared, people can talk to each other about it. And that's really important for that safe space to say, these are the kinds of things that are important. These are the kinds of needs and desires that we all have. But the way in which we meet these desires, the same ways in which we meet these needs might be different. To the extent that we understand what these needs are, we can develop ways to meet these needs in ways that are mutually sustaining, that we can do better when we do it together. My name is Asher Walden. I've designed a deck of cards called the Empyrean Deck. I have a degree in theology and I studied comparative religion. I've studied a number of different religious traditions through texts, but also experientially. I did a lot of sitting meditation when I was actually a Zen Buddhist monk for a period of time. In all the religious traditions I've explored, I also throw myself into practices, ritual, music. And this is how I get what I get as I've developed this deck. And the idea of the deck is that it captures everything that I've learned that I think is important. I really believe that for all of its problems, religion is too good a resource to pass up. Religions are the inheritors of incredible and important wisdom for what it means to be human and how to do it well. I think it's really hard to be happy and to be a good human without having a sense of that wisdom, without having some language, without having some experience, without having dedicated some period of your life or aspect of your life to exploring the insight and value that religions preserve. So my work over my lifetime has been trying to figure out, what is that wisdom? How do we make sense of it for our time, our generation, our era, our political situation? How can we share it? How can we build upon it? How can we avoid the pitfalls of institutional religion? What I've done is, instead of writing a book or teaching a class, I've captured everything that I think is important in this deck of cards. And the deck of cards has two parts to it. It has a list of what you would think of as archetypal images or archetypes, but it also has a structure. It has an order or a logic to it. Much like astrology, it has all of your archetypal elements, and it has logic, ways of analyzing relationships between things. Out of this language, you can tell a story, and you can tell a story that makes sense. For humans, that's the gold, that's the treasure, a story that makes sense, that brings together all of the data and confusion and information that constitute our lives and our networks and our relationships, and having an overarching framework within which we can say, aha, this makes sense. Not that everything is good, not that everything is pleasurable, not that everything is a learning experience, but everything has a reason for being what it is and where it is that can be integrated. So that's what the Empyrean Deck is meant to do. We can talk more later on about how it works.
When I looked at your astrological blueprint, this is someone who is born to serve as a pattern keeper. You are the pattern keeper whose very existence helps humanity evolve its understanding of consciousness spiritually and the sacred architecture of reality itself. Every element of your chart speaks to a soul that has incarnated with a specific mission to synthesize ancient wisdom with contemporary understanding, to create new languages for timeless truths, and to nurture communities of seekers who are ready to embrace more expansive ways of being. The Empyrean Deck isn't only your creative work, it's the physical manifestation of your soul's purpose encoded from birth. The integration of your Empyrean Deck, prefaced with your astrological chart, what I see, it revolves extraordinary synchronicity. What I find most remarkable is how your philosophical framework isn't separate from your cosmic blueprint. It's your chart speaking through you in conscious articulated form. There are several additional layers that we'll explore during this conversation that I hope will enrich your understanding of both your personal evolution and the broader implications of your work.
That's wonderful. Everything you said speaks so clearly and specifically to what I want this product to be, what I want this art object to be, and how I want it to work. That sounds great. Sign me up.
I want to take you back to 1975, because the astrological era of 1975 was absolutely extraordinary, and it represents one of the most significant periods of spiritual and consciousness transformation in modern history. And to understand what was happening around that time was when you experience your Saturn return. The Saturn return is a period of maturation. And I want to examine the broader cosmic context that was shaping, first of all, an entire generation's spiritual awakening. Now, the mid-1970s marked the height of Pluto in Libra generations, coming of age. Pluto had entered Libra in 1971 and would remain until 1984, which would fundamentally revolutionize humanity's understanding of relationships, balance, justice, and aesthetic harmony. But 1975 was particularly potent because it was when many souls born with Pluto in Libra were reaching their late 20s and early 30s. This was the age when spiritual seeking typically intensified. And more specifically, 1975 was dominated by several major astrological transits that created what I might call a spiritual emergency for many seekers. This placement dissolved boundaries around religious and philosophical systems, creating both spiritual hunger and confusion about traditional authorities. People born during this period, like yourself, would naturally be drawn to comparative religion and the synthesis of diverse wisdom traditions.
We have this hunger to pull together and recreate something that other people were just born into. We don't have that, so we have to create it for ourselves.
Exactly. And Uranus, which is a planet of, it's a symbolic of revolution, change. It's like a cosmic awakener. And Uranus was in Scorpio from 1974 to 1981, which created revolutionary breakthroughs in the understanding of the depths of consciousness, psychology, and transformation. This placement usually correlates with interest in depth psychology, occult studies, and alternative approaches to healing and personal transformation. So Neptune in Sagittarius with Uranus in Scorpio created a generation that needed to revolutionize spiritual understanding through direct psychological and mystical experience. Now, Saturn, which is the planet that symbolizes limitations, restructuring, teaching, law, it's got that kind of energy where people feel limited. It's meant to teach you something, but it was moving through Cancer during much of 1975, which is particularly significant for understanding the collective spiritual mood, because Saturn in Cancer creates a deep need to mature our understanding of nurturing, emotional wisdom, and what constitutes true spiritual identity. So this wasn't a time for detached philosophical speculation. It was a time when spiritual seeking had to become emotionally authentic and personally nurturing. By 1975, these revolutionary seeds planted in the mid-60s were beginning to mature into more systematic approaches to alternative spirituality. It led to a pioneering entrepreneurial energy to spiritual seeking. It wasn't a time for following established teachers or traditions. It was a time for individuals to begin developing their own unique approaches to spiritual development and sharing them with others. What makes your Saturn return in July 1975 so significant is that it occurred precisely at the peak of this collective spiritual transformation. Your personal initiation into spiritual maturity happened exactly when the collective consciousness was most open to new forms of spiritual authority and systematic approaches to consciousness development. The astrological climate of 1975 was deeply influenced by the cultural aftermath of the 1960s. People were no longer satisfied with having mystical experiences or protesting existing systems. They needed to create practical, sustainable alternatives. This is why so many enduring spiritual movements and teachers emerged during this period.
Yeah, I want to highlight one of the things you said about this balance between, on the one hand, yearning for structure, for a system, for ways in which people can network and work together, something that's responsible and disciplined. But on the other hand, that's based on authentic, direct experience, emotional experience, introverted look into how our consciousness actually works and where our own experience really comes from. This is a nice way for me to articulate what my goal is, right? To find a way of putting together all these elements in a way that's workable, that's manipulatable, right? That's something that we can engage with in a consistent and robust way, but that has this really authentic and sincere depth that anybody can check for themselves. Yes, this either tracks with my experience or it doesn't. And that's really important. People will not and should not jump on board with a system or a philosophy that doesn't resonate with their life experience.
And that collective spiritual climate supported the kind of work that you would eventually develop, the synthesis of diverse wisdom traditions into practical systematic tools for consciousness development. When we come to understand this broader astrological context, this helps explain why the Empyrean Deck feels so timely and necessary even decades later, because it's emerged and initiated during one of the most spiritually revolutionary periods in modern history, where the collective consciousness was most receptive to new forms of spiritual technology and systematic approaches to wisdom transmission. Do you have any questions about how this broader astrological climate might have specifically influenced your spiritual development and the eventual creation of your systematic approach to consciousness work?
Actually, no. What we've talked about so far, it really rings a lot of bells for me. It really fits with what I hope the deck is and speaks to what I hope the impact it will have and the way it will help people.
I see this as your chart speaking through you in a conscious, articulated form. Your late life recognition of autism adds a crucial dimension here. How do you see neurodivergent ways of processing reality as potentially essential to humanity's spiritual evolution?
I think there's a couple answers to that. One is a social relationship between neurodivergent people and neurotypical people, to the extent that they form different aspects or different dimensions of the social body. I think, among other things, spirituality, and I think this actually comes through really nicely in astrology, in that paradigm, that what happens to us as individuals spiritually is reflected and is grounded in what happens to our society, our culture, the planet as a whole. And I think that we're becoming more and more cognizant of those resonances, right? I couldn't do what I'm doing without my place within these larger social and economic transformations that are happening all around us. So I guess there's a social aspect and a personal aspect. On a personal aspect, it has to do with the way neurodivergent people hyperfixate, right? Hyperfocus on one or two issues or one kind of realm of inquiry that they just get really excited about. And they're just not that interested in anything else. I think generally speaking, the people who are doing groundbreaking work, who are discovering new things, who are developing new methods are generally going to be neurodivergent people, right? Not that they all succeed, right? Just because you do something new doesn't mean that it actually works. Just because you do something new doesn't mean that it sticks, doesn't mean that it catches on. So it's our job as neurodivergent people to throw ourselves in 100% to whatever it is that we just enjoy exploring, whether it's pottery or math or music or coding, just do it. Whether it will have any impact on the rest of the world is not your problem. You don't know what's going to stick. And our job is to do it. There's this relationship between neurodivergent people who are on the periphery of society. We're always the outsiders, always doing weird things. But if we get something right, if we find something that other people can use, neurotypical people will discover it and then will pass it on through their networks, through their families, through their social media, through whatever it is. Neurotypical people are the communicators. They're like the network or the framework through which information gets passed along. It's not their job to create new information. It's not their job to discover new information. Their job is, if they find a good piece of juicy gossip, let other people know. And other people will believe them, because that's the kind of neurotypical mindset. People get information socially, and they look to whoever appears most authoritative, most successful, smartest, or most interesting. They trust those people and then share the information that they get straightforwardly. They don't add to it. They don't take away from it. They just pass along. And then that information gets to wherever it needs to get to, so that other people, usually other neurodivergent people, can say, oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. And then they can incorporate that and continue that learning curve. So I think that neurodivergent, neurotypical people are mutually dependent in what we call the human race, right? It's that sort of proportion or that balance or cooperation between different neurotypes that makes humanity what it is and has made humanity successful, I think. And I think that what we're seeing now, this is a total tangent, I think what we're seeing now is a breakdown. Every once in a while, you know, the relationship, right? The system sometimes works well and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes things are really coming together and sometimes things are falling apart. So right now we're in a system in which things are falling apart, in which there's a counter-revolutionary movement among neurotypical people who are seeing less acceptance, less tolerance than ever of people who think differently, right? Whether we call them neurodivergent or not, we don't want to hear different ideas. We don't want to hear challenging ideas. We don't want to hear ideas from people who are messing with our sense of identity, whether those core beliefs are expressed religiously or in terms of some kind of nationalism or xenophobia, right? We don't want to have to deal with people who think differently or who appear to think differently. We're not that concerned about skin color or accent, but anyone who really isn't with the program, people are very suspicious of right now.
This is something that's a gift to celebrate, not something to fix.
You mean the current sort of disorderly,
no,
the current tension, or
being neurodivergent is really a gift to celebrate. It's not something that we've got to fix. We've got to normalize. What happened around the age of 29 in your life?
Interestingly, that was about the age that I had my last major astrological consult. I do think that was an important time. Around that time was when I had gone back to graduate school. I think there was a couple things that were going on personally, but it was actually around that time that I was working on my dissertation and had come up with the idea of this different version of the I Ching, which is what my deck is actually. And first had this idea that this would be how I formulate my ideas. Personally, it was a chaotic time. I was married to my first wife, had my first child, and then separated from my first wife very quickly. So it was very unstable. There was a lot of instability in my life at that time.
This is your first Saturn return. So age 29, you were being cosmically initiated into your role as a spiritual father figure and wisdom keeper for your soul community. Because Saturn in Cancer demands that we mature our relationship with nurturing, protection, and emotional wisdom. Yours is in the 11th house. So this maturation occurs through service to the collective good and the development of your unique contribution to human consciousness. The timing of July 1975 is crucial here. It occurred during a period when you would have been deeply engaged in spiritual seeking and academic pursuit. So this return didn't just mark personal maturation, it was like a cosmic green light for you to begin the frameworks and systems that would eventually become the Empyrean Deck.
That was also the year that I actually started teaching instead of just being a graduate student. Between that and the birth of my first kid, I really did start thinking about what, if I wanted my kid to learn one thing, like if I was going to create a book of wisdom, what would I want her to read years hence? And that's when I really started thinking in this way.
What aspects of traditional spiritual authority did you find yourself questioning or needing to reconstruct during this time?
There wasn't any one thing that I was critical of or dissatisfied with. I just always felt like it wasn't quite right. My first big explorations in high school and college of the philosophical systems, there was a lot of things that I liked and a lot of things that rang true, but there wasn't any one figure that I said, aha, this philosopher gets it right. Later on, when I joined the Zen Center and started doing intensive Buddhist practice, there was a lot of things I liked about it. There's a lot of things I agreed with about the teaching, but I just didn't think it was quite right. I just didn't think that it had all of the pieces. And I had that experience. And then later on, when I became Christian and was looking into discerning a call for ministry, there was a lot of things I liked about that particular church, but it wasn't quite right. I always hungered. I always wanted. I always thought my life would be easier if there was some teacher or school of thought that I could just plug myself into and stick with the party line. That's what I wanted, right? I wanted someone to say, you will be my student, you will do this. And I would say, great, that makes my life easy. But it just never happened because none of those teachings quite had all of the pieces. They all had a lot of them. There were some that did better in some areas than others, but it was just never that sweet spot of all of the pieces.
When I was looking at your solar identity, where your sun is placed, which is in Cancer at 11 degrees in the 11th house, soul, whose essential identity is built around nurturing, protecting, and creating safe and brave spaces for spiritual growth. But this isn't the crab that retreats into its shell. This is a Cancer placed in the 11th house of collective service, making you the cosmic mother / father figure whose protective instincts extend to entire communities of seekers. Cancer's ruled by the moon, so connecting your solar identity directly to the realm of intuition and emotion and the sacred feminine principle, your essential self operates through feeling, empathy, and deep emotional intelligence. The 11th house placement means these Cancerian gifts are meant to serve something larger than personal security or family dynamics. The 11th degree is particularly significant because this is a degree that indicates someone who must learn to balance individual needs with group consciousness. So your solar journey involves learning to trust your emotional and intuitive wisdom while using it to guide and nurture collective spiritual evolution. Your sun's conjunction with Saturn in the same house creates what I would call a sacred responsibility. So you're not just here to be spiritually nurturing, you're here to create lasting structures, Saturn, and systems that can continue nurturing others long after you've gone. And the Empyrean Deck represents this perfectly. It's a systematic approach to spiritual wisdom that can serve countless seekers. How do you experience the tension between your need for emotional security and your calling to serve the collective?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. That's the question that I don't have an answer to yet, but it's such a good question and so important, especially over the last couple of years as I've been integrating my autism and various aspects of my neurotype, understanding how my mind works, what I need in order to be healthy. I've been doing that very self-consciously and trying to take notes about what I've been learning in my own journey, even as I pay attention to how other people are navigating the same kinds of problems. And on the other hand, I have this platform, this deck. My idea with the deck is what you said about creating a safe space or a sacred space. The deck itself is not a doctrine, it's not a dogma. I see it as a language, a way of talking about these things, but it's also a platform within which people can engage in these experiences, give names to aspects of their own experience. That's what's really important about the language. It's a way people can get a grasp on the important, volatile aspects of their emotional, intuitive, and sacred experiences. Because there's a language that's shared, people can talk to each other about it. And that's really important for that safe space to say that these are the kinds of things that are important. These are the kinds of needs and desires that we all have. But the way in which we meet these desires, the same ways in which we meet these needs, might be different. To the extent that we understand what these needs are, we can develop ways to meet these needs in ways that are mutually sustaining, that we can do better when we do it together. We do it more effectively, more sustainably when we can found these kind of communities. Could be very short-term community, could be a community of just you and I having this conversation, or it can be a community of people learning about the deck or playing with the cards together. But that's what a safe space is, right? That's what a church is, ideally, right? It's a community of people who are holding each other and supporting each other in ways that contain and constrain, like a hug, but at the same time allow for the freedom that each individual needs to make their own mistakes and to find what works for them. I hope that's what happens, right?
So not only a safe space, but a brave space to be fully self-expressed.
Yeah, and that's hard.
What does it mean to you to create lasting spiritual structures that outlive you?
One part of it is that it's just this intrinsically inspiring aspiration, right? We all want to build something. Don't you want to build something? We want to do something that doesn't just bring us happiness and contentment, right? We want to create something that will impact others, that will impact our community. So the idea and the hope that this is a part of my mark, not just in terms of my family and my personal relationships, which are obviously so important to me, but that even I, who am such an extreme introvert, I don't even like leaving the house if I don't have to. If I can create this thing and find ways that are comfortable for me, I don't always have to be entirely comfortable. I have to be willing to go out of my comfort zone to introduce this to different people. Otherwise, it's not going to help anybody, right? Yeah, that's part of what it means to be human, right? This desire to have an impact, to contribute something, to build something that will continue to make a difference, whether or not we're around to enjoy it.
That's beautiful. I want to move on to the placement of your moon, because this talks about your emotional body, and your lunar nature is in Taurus in the ninth house. What does that mean? It means that it reveals the deepest truth about your emotional nature and your soul's needs. This placement creates the embodied philosopher, someone whose spiritual and philosophical pursuits must be grounded in tangible, practical application. Your soul doesn't want to understand truth, it needs to give truth physical form. The placement of the moon requires stability, beauty, and sensory richness to feel emotionally satisfied. But in the ninth house, the realm of higher learning, publishing, teaching, and cross-cultural wisdom, this earth sign energy becomes the foundation for making abstract, or what may appear as abstract, spiritual concepts accessible and practical. The 2 degrees suggests new beginnings and pioneering energy. Your emotional satisfaction comes from being among the first to ground new spiritual insight into practical form. This explains why traditional religious or philosophical systems, no matter how profound, would never fully satisfy you. Your soul needs to participate in creating new forms, new languages, new systems. You also have a conjunction of Mars and Taurus, and that represents your drive, your passion, and how you assert yourself in the world. The drive is steady, persistent, and focused on creating lasting value. This Moon-Mars conjunction in the ninth house creates an unstoppable force for spiritual innovation and systematic wisdom sharing. Does that resonate with you?
One thing that certainly resonates is the way in which these ideas and the cards and the structure have been building over the course of my life, right? There wasn't any one transformative moment. There wasn't any one insight. There wasn't any one thing that I realized, aha, this is the answer. It's this kind of steady, persistent building effort. And I shouldn't say it's that consistent because it's really not. I go at it from this way and I go at it from this way. And then there were years that I just didn't read much or do much except live my life. All of that contributes to whatever wisdom I have to share. Just the idea that it's this sort of persistent effort over time. I'm not done yet. I've got to keep on building, keep on marketing, keep on spreading the reach of this thing and thinking about how I want to articulate what it is, who it might help, and how it might help them. Yeah, it's work, some heavy lifting, but it's the kind of work that's done over time, slowly, trudgingly.
You feel called to pioneer new forms of wisdom transmission.
And I want it to be true. I want it to be my own. I wanted it to be right. One thing I've been saying in other conversations has come up again and again. I want to make sure I get it right. I want to make sure I don't ever want to fall into a dogmatic, this is what I've said and this is the answer. I don't think I'll ever get that. I don't think I'll ever have that answer. This is the kind of accumulated breadth of wisdom that I've gathered. As I learn new things, that's what makes it exciting. That's what keeps the work fresh. The effect has been slow, persistent, but experientially, it's, oh, here's a new thing that I can add, or here's a new dimension. Actually, I have to be careful about that because at some point I do have to stop. I do have to say, okay, no more edits. The book is going out. No more edits. I got to send it to the publisher. But yeah, it's that newness, it's that freshness, it's that experience of discovering or making a new connection, drawing a new parallel, a new analogy that makes it so worthwhile for me, that makes it so pleasurable.
I love how, in hearing your words, how you bring the chart to life, because you're talking about your Virgo ascendant. I'll touch on that in a second. How does your drive for spiritual innovation balance with your need for stability and tradition?
I do feel like both of those things are true. I guess the way that I integrate that has been that even though I don't accept whole hog a given religious tradition or thinker, I really do have enormous respect for those insights. Those are the insights that I'm trying to preserve. Those insights always come from somewhere, from the work of these extraordinary figures, texts, and traditions that have gone before me. So I do love those traditions. I respect those. I have gratitude for the inheritance that we all have access to. And so my kind of whatever creativity or whatever synthesis I'm doing, it's not saying, oh, you all have it wrong, here's the correct thing. It's how do we put these things together? How do we preserve what is right, good, and true, and meaningful that these traditions have to offer?
This is the Virgo ascendant at 13 degrees, what I would call the sacred perfectionist's approach to life. When I say 13 degrees, what that means is that this is the practitioner. This is where we find active development and refinement. The soul has gained enough experience to work consciously with this energy. They're building competence and beginning to understand the nuances of how this planetary function operates. This is where real growth happens through conscious application and practice. Your Virgo ascendant is how you present yourself to the world, interface with the world, and approach your life's work. Because Virgo rising individuals are born with an innate understanding that perfection exists in the details and that sacred work requires precision, and true service comes through systematic improvement of existing conditions. This is not the perfectionism of ego, but it's the perfectionism of devotion. So your approach to life is methodical, analytical, and focused on creating practical systems that genuinely help people. This is where the 13 degree adds a spiritual dimension. Virgo's an earth energy. It adds that spiritual dimension to this earth sign. This is energy of someone who sees the sacred in the systematic. So your Virgo ascendant explains why the Empyrean deck had to be so carefully crafted, so precisely organized, so systematically complete. I would contend that your soul cannot rest until spiritual wisdom is presented in its most refined, accessible, and practically useful form. This is also why your diverse life experiences, from Zen monasticism to truck driving, were all necessary research for your ultimate work. Virgo rising with your spiritual focus creates what I call the sacred technician. This is someone who understands that spiritual work requires the same precision and dedication as any master craft. Your appearance in the world is that of someone who can be trusted with the most precious spiritual insights because you have the discipline and the discernment to handle them responsibly. How do you experience the relationship between spiritual perfection and practical precision?
Yeah, that's a really interesting set of questions. It's really fascinating.
Did that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, it resonates with a couple different places. This is one of those places where it's hard to put things together in a way that's going to make sense. But
take your time.
What I feel like, I guess one of the first things that came up for me was I have this sort of Hegelian idea, this sense that the spirit is moving in a direction, that what we call spirit or consciousness or existence or being, it's all the same thing. It's spirit, it's intelligence. And part of what it means to be intelligent is that it has a direction, it has a place it is going, and it has very specific methods or patterns by which it does what it does. So my relationship with spirituality really is this sense of looking carefully at what spirit is doing. This is why I've really enjoyed the way you were talking about the chart manifesting itself through me. I love this idea of being a vessel or a channel through which the spirit is just doing what it does. That's what I think we all are in some sense. That's what I think it means. That's what it is to be human. We're vessels, carriers of these cosmic, ecological, and economic forces where all these energies come together and pass through us, and they have a direction. It's as if you should say that there's something the spirit wants. And whatever the spirit wants, it manifests in individual lives, but also in social and political and cosmological scales. I guess my life's work has been trying to figure out those patterns, trying to figure out those structures, just to watch what's going on as these energies flow through me, how they flow in my own life, what kinds of things come into being, what kinds of transformations and changes are taking places, saying, aha, these are the patterns. And so the more precise a language you have to describe the different transformations and movements of spirit, the better your facility will be, not just for describing them, but for engaging in a conscious, intentional way. It's not just that the energies are passing through you, they also constitute you, because you are not just a blank slate. You have to contribute something, right? You're adding your own energy and intention and desire to this stream, to this energy, in order to amplify it. And you can either do that well or you can do it badly, right? If you're playing an instrument in an orchestra, you can play really quiet so no one hears you, or you can play loud enough that people can hear you and you can get it right, or you can play way too loud and get your notes wrong and mess up the whole thing. The better your kind of facility is with what the thing is supposed to sound like, the better you can blend your contribution with the energy, with the melody, the symphony really that's going on around you. And so I think that's how we find happiness, right? I think that's how we become fulfilled, not through getting anything in our own lives, but by mastering the art of contributing to whatever stream, whatever orchestra, whatever science, whatever project, whatever political ideal, whatever platform that you see yourself in most intrinsically. Again, the better the language, the better your tools, the better work that you can do in whatever that project is.
What does it mean to you to be a spiritual craftsperson as distinct from a spiritual seeker?
I don't know yet, because I think in my own mind, that transition has been so recent. That's something that I have experienced very recently and am still experiencing, this transition to really understanding myself as an explorer, as a seeker, as someone who just wants to learn, making that transition point to saying, okay, I don't know everything now, but I know enough. If I don't start crystallizing, packaging, and sharing what I know, now's the time to do it. Now seems to be the moment. This is the time in my life where I don't know whether it's this year or this decade or this week. I don't know what the scale is, but about now, in some measure of whatever nowness is, now is the time where the rubber meets the road, where what I've learned, I have to get it out there. I have to start publishing, so to speak, whatever that means. And over the last couple of months, last couple of years, I guess I'm a teacher, right? Now I'm a technician. Now I'm someone who has a craft, has a technique that I've mastered well enough that I can start passing it on to other people.
How has your need for systematic completeness shaped the development of your spiritual teachings?
The funny thing about the deck is it's 8 houses and 8 cards in each deck, right? So there's 64. And again, the original model for this was the I Ching, right? So you have 8 trigrams and you match them with 8 other trigrams. You have this chart, 8 times 8 is 64. As I created that, I realized that there was a card missing. It's the one I call the Empyrean card. It's not in a house. It's like the nothingness card or the emptiness card, the card that represents the Tao, the ultimate metaphysical origin, the sense that we all come from someplace. The other cards in the deck, the 64 cards really represent aspects of our lives, how we live, what we need to live well, and that kind of structure. But the 65th card, the Empyrean card, represents nothingness, origin, and what is outside of ourselves. It was sometime after I'd had these 64 cards, I was like, oh, I need a 65th card. And then that lasted for about a couple of months, or maybe as long as a year. And I realized there's this one other card that I've been thinking about, something was missing. And so at some point I had this experience, it was almost a year ago, that I said, okay, this is that 66th card, the last card, the white Empyrean card. After that, I knew, okay, now it's done. Now it's complete. This is my view of spirituality. Ultimately, the deck is my model of what spirituality is, or what kinds of things it must encompass to be a complete package. The answer to that question is you need these 64 things, or these 8 houses that describe human life from an immanent perspective. What are the things we need to do or encounter or experience within our lives in order for our lives to be rich and fulfilled? But at the same time, we have these 2 other images, right? The black and the white, the yes and the no, the ultimate origin and the ultimate end, the alpha and the omega. And these 2 things are like the North and the South Pole around which everything else revolves. So whatever else we do in our lives to experience joy or value or meaning, we cannot have the full picture without a sense that our lives come from a dark, chaotic origin, and also that our lives end in some kind of ultimate transformation. This is what happens after our lives are over, after our lives are complete. We transcend to whatever the heck is next. But this life does not make sense. This life is not whole until we see it from that outside perspective, until we understand our lives as being contained within a beginning, an ultimate origin, and an end, a final reckoning or whatever. Does that make sense?
I totally resonate with that. I was reading your preface to the Empyrean Deck. In reading this, alongside your astrological chart, there's a huge amount to go through in your astrological chart, but it reveals something quite extraordinary to me as a reader. Again, this is not about prediction, this is about possibilities and empowerment. But I saw that every major theme in your written philosophy corresponds directly to specific placements in your birth chart. I was thinking,
Wow.
This isn't coincidence. It's the natural expression of your soul's blueprint made conscious and articulate. Your opening question was, what is spirit? That perfectly embodies your Gemini midheaven energy. The mind must categorize, communicate, and create frameworks for understanding. But what I noticed, how immediately you complicate the question. And this is your North Node in Sagittarius, pushing beyond simple categorization towards comprehensive philosophical inquiry. The way you describe spirit as both one and only one, which moves and flows like water, and simultaneously present in infinite forms, reflects your chart's fundamental tension between unity and multiplicity. So your Cancer sun seeks the unified source, while your Gemini placements recognize infinite expressions, and your Taurus moon demands that spirit be substantial and experiential, while your Sagittarius placements insist it be expansive and philosophical. Let's unpack this. So I mentioned the midheaven. The midheaven is in your South Node and Mercury in Gemini. This is the master communicator. Your South Node is to do with your karmic past, your comfort zone. Your North Node are your growth edges, where you're walking towards. Your 10th house contains multiple significant placements in Gemini, emphasizing your role as a communicator, a translator of spiritual wisdom. And Mercury, to do with intelligence, how we think, the mind, indicates that your professional reputation, which is your midheaven, the indication here I would suggest is that your professional reputation is built on your communication abilities. But the South Node suggests you're meant to evolve beyond traditional teaching methods. So this combination suggests, while you have natural gifts as a teacher and communicator, your evolutionary edge comes from developing entirely new languages and frameworks for spiritual understanding, as distinct from simply transmitting existing knowledge.
That sounds like the deck, right? And it sounds like this idea that instead of writing books, instead of giving lectures, instead of teaching college classes, I just give people the deck and say, play with it. And if I've done my job right, simply playing with the deck. In the book, there's a couple different ways you can play with the deck. You can use like a tarot, oracle, there's a cooperative game. There's different things that you can do with the deck. I don't really care what you do with the deck, as long as you enjoy it, as long as it's fun and colorful and it hits all of the imaginative points. It's not just that people will like it, it's that because they like it, they'll explore the system. And simply by playing with the cards, they'll see the system for themselves. To me, there's nothing more magical than seeing something for yourself. There's nothing more magical than having a couple of cards show up together and forming a constellation and saying, aha, that's a pattern. And I know what that pattern is. I recognize that sort of conjunction of elements. And you see it, again, experientially. You see it in your own life. You see it in your desires. You say, oh, wait, this isn't just an abstract philosophical system. This is something that helps me make sense of my life by providing a framework, a language, a place, a safe space in which we can give names to these various spirits, these various desires. Some desires I'm maybe ashamed of, or maybe I don't want to talk about. As soon as I understand this is something that everybody experiences, then maybe there's a way I can make sense of it by facing it head on rather than avoiding it.
Here's another correlation between what I was reading in the preface in the Empyrean Deck and your chart, your extended metaphor of consciousness as the inside of a house with various thoughtfully furnished rooms is pure fourth house north node wisdom. Let me explain. The fourth house governs home, foundation, and inner sanctuary, while your north node here indicates you're meant to develop and share insights about creating inner dwelling places for the soul. But this isn't just any house metaphor, each room having a purpose within which our lives and choices have the meanings they do, end quote. And that reflects your Virgo ascendant's understanding that sacred work happens through precise attention to function and purpose. So your mind naturally sees how different aspects of consciousness serves different functions. Just your analytical gifts help you organize spiritual insights systematically. And the question, what is this house constructed upon? How is it built and maintained? That reveals your Saturn in Cancer in the 11th house. Not content with beautiful metaphors, you want to understand the structural principles that allow spiritual communities and individual consciousness to be built and sustained over time.
This idea of houses, this must be a Cancer thing, but this idea of a house is so central for me as one of those basic metaphors in which everything else is built. And ultimately, I think that to be human is to be a house of spirits, right? A household of different desires and personalities and plans that have to function together in a harmonious way. And if the house functions harmoniously, then that kind of internal harmony manifests as a good life. What does it mean to have a good life? I don't know. It has to do with having all of our innermost desires met, having our innermost voices heard and acknowledged, having a balance in our relationships and the various projects that we participate in. So this idea that consciousness is not simple, or on some ultimate high level, consciousness is one, right? But in terms of the transition from the one to the many, consciousness diversifies, and that's how it gets its robustness in the manifest world. It takes these different shapes of different spirits, different desires, different patterns. And to be a human just means to create a space within yourself, I guess, a kind of imaginal space or an interior space within which all of these desires and spirits and plans and patterns can coexist. And that's why you need a language that they can all speak. They don't all naturally speak the same language, right? But if you can teach yourself this language, it gives you the terms amongst which these different desires can cooperate, can find ways in which they can all get what they want or say what they want to say.
You had a description about the spirit as like a furnace or an engine or a loom, internal process of splitting and joining, turning and building and stripping away. I really like the mathematical precision and organic flow of your image of spirit folding and interlocks like crochet, knitting together with mathematical precision and pulling apart and starting again. That beautifully illustrates the tension between your rising sign of Virgo and your Sagittarian placements. Virgo sees the mathematical precision, the systematic patterns, the careful craftsmanship, where Sagittarius sees the organic flow, the natural cycles of expansion and contraction, the way patterns serve larger evolutionary purposes. This is why the Empyrean Deck had to be both systematically complete, Virgo, and philosophically expansive, Sagittarius. So your soul couldn't create something that was just organized or inspired. It had to be both simultaneously.
One thing that was important to me was that it not be a closed system. I didn't want it to be dogmatic. The Enneagram is a wonderful system, but it's closed, right? In the sense that you either agree with it or you don't, but there's not a scholarly community adding to it, adjusting it, updating it with new knowledge from empirical science. And I think something similar is true with astrology. It's true with most religious traditions, that there's a sense of closure. Even when religious traditions do evolve and when people are adding to it, there's a sense of orthodoxy, which you have to accept or not. This may be just my resistance to that kind of authority as a neurodivergent person and someone persistently dissatisfied with pre-existing stories. I want it to be something that will grow. I want it to be something that people can find new ways of interpreting. In principle, I may have gotten some of these things wrong. Some of these images may not be quite right, and some of them may be pretty good in terms of my own life, but other people with different experiences might say, let's just fix this a little bit. I want people to have that freedom. And that's a hard thing to build into a system. I don't know that I've done that as successfully as I might have liked to. But in principle, what I really have is a set of elements. The elements have a natural set of relations categorized in a certain way so that they make sense. It's easy for people to see why things are the way they are once they get a little bit familiar with the system. I would love for people to, if they find the system useful, not just accept it dogmatically, but to say, this is why I think it works, or this is why I think it's useful, or this is what I think the underlying meaning of the system is. So when I think about why cards like this work, or why astrology works, different people can have different ideas about why these things are effective. What's important is that you believe that it works. What's important is that you try it out and see how it works and how it doesn't work. I have my own beliefs about what these cards mean, how they work, and what they represent on some ultimate level. But you don't have to agree with me on that to use the cards.
I think you have knowledge. Beliefs are only necessary when knowledge is absent. I don't need to believe in gravity because it exists. I don't believe in the astrology that other people believe in because I question so much of it. I'm not satisfied with the beliefs that have been inculcated over millennia. I'm not dismissing or disparaging those things. Some of those things are sacred, but I need to have the knowledge, not a belief about it. I need to understand, why is Saturn symbolized by limitation? Why is Pluto symbolized by destruction and reformation and transformation? I need to understand this. And if I have that knowledge, I don't need the belief. Because if I just believe it, I can never be a competent evolutionary astrologer because I'm just accepting what's gone on before. That means then I have to have a belief rather than the knowledge. Belief is only necessary when knowledge is absent.
It's important to me, and I think the best way to talk about this is in terms of individual cards. One of the ones we talked about before was the healer, right? So we all have different ideas, different backgrounds about what it means to be a healer, the psychology or the emotional energy behind that. And there's a range, right? If this were a tarot deck, then I would have a list of terms and say, this card can mean X, Y, and Z, and that's it. But that's not how I think these cards work. I think there's something about the idea of a healer, the experience of healer, that there's a continuity, there's a line between a concrete experience that a person has of being healed, having an encounter with a healer or a midwife, or being a healer or a midwife. There's a relationship between a concrete experience and some kind of universal pattern or truth.
Yeah.
So there's a connection. And whatever that connection is, that's what the meaning of the card is, right? It's the connection between some kind of transcendent, ultimate reality or some kind of pattern that occurs again and again in existence, objectively, and our own personal direct experience. Now, you may not have had any particular experience like that in your lifetime yet, but you probably will. And when you have that experience, then you'll know, you'll see for yourself. And again, that's what you were saying before, and that's what I was saying before too. No substitute for direct experience. There's no substitute for seeing it for yourself. And so what I think good teaching does, good teaching should set up situations in which you'll see it for yourself. Good teaching should set up models, metaphors, and puzzles. It's like a puzzle. You have no idea what the answer is, but as you're going along in your day, something happens, boom, and there's the answer You always immediately know it when you see it. You can always recognize after the fact, yeah, that is the solution to this puzzle, but it's not something that you would necessarily be able to guess before you've had that experience. So that experience, that opening, that kind of expansion of your horizon, of your vista, is something that can't be replaced. And I think it's something that people are really hungry for. People are so tired of having other people tell them what they're supposed to think and what the truth is, when they know that the teaching they're getting is not good teaching, when they know that it's not true. And yet they don't have a language, they don't have the sort of validation that says your experience is valid. Your experience is a better window into ultimate reality than anything you could read from a book. And if the book helps you understand your experience, if the book helps you integrate your experience, if the book helps you give language and give voice and give order and meaning to what you've experienced, then great, then it's doing its job. But that core has to be your experience.
My particular persuasion is evolutionary astrology. Others will go into mundane astrology. If you're studying mundane astrology, you have to know your history. You can't look at what is happening in the world and then trace it back to the patterns that have happened in times gone by. It's similar to evolutionary astrology. 30%, I would say, is books, but 70% or even 80% is reading charts, looking at patterns, looking at the symbology, and tracking, tracing, and evaluating. Like when I was looking at your chart, I was going, what was happening around 1975 in the world? And tracking, almost like a tracking mechanism to look at the influence and the symbology of celestial patterns at that time. It's not the fact that Saturn is going to limit you. You know, it's the representation, it's the symbology of it. And then when you look at all of these patterns and you start looking at the mandala of the soul or the chart, you start to go, okay, 1975, that was the era of this. In 1958, that was a different era. This happened and that happened. You can see patterns emerging. Then I know that's knowledge. I know that to be true. I know that's what happened at that time. It's not some academic pursuit or intellectual perusal. I've got the basics of it through books, but books will only take me so far. You have to have that visceral experience. The best healers I've met are agencies of amplification, whereby they're able to bring in and connect to a higher source, whatever that might be in their practice, but ground it in practical reality. So it's like bringing the ethereal into the material. And they're good communicators who have established an ever-ready media that conducts two-way traffic between the human and divinity, whatever that might be for whatever persuasion a person has. I wanted to ask you another thing before we wrap up, because there's so much to go through in your chart. But I think this is worth mentioning because there are several profound themes we haven't fully explored that really deserve attention, I feel. And one of those is your Cancer, Sun and Moon dominated chart, because that speaks to profound feminine wisdom principles, yet your written philosophy emphasizes active transformation. My question is, how does receptivity, surrender, and the feminine aspects of spiritual development inform your work?
For better or for worse, whether this is true or not, I often don't see myself as a creative person. I don't see myself as a synthesizer or builder or architect, although I have that in my personality type, and that's what I'm making my living off of right now. I really see myself as someone who's receiving this information through books, through experience, through sacred practices. I think it's important, and we were talking about this at the beginning of our conversation too, like this idea that we are vessels, that the spirit does what it does in and through us. And part of our job is to be at most a midwife, right? To create a space and a context so that this thing can happen, which ultimately happens all by itself, or at least it should, But things can go wrong, things can get difficult, things can get tricky. So the job of the midwife or the healer is just to help the process along in this very gentle and gingerly fashion, right? Not to interfere, not to take a scalpel and slice the uterus open and yank the thing out, right? What we want is to preserve natural processes that support, feed, nurture, something that happens all by itself. And yet things can go wrong. There are things we do inadvertently that really interfere with the process. To understand the process means to understand how little we have to do. What's the bare minimum we can do to help this along without screwing it up? In terms of my creative process, my spirituality, how I live my life, I really am a Taoist. I really do just want the thing to happen all by itself. My engagement with it is only where it's fun, only where it's interesting, only where I think I can help. But I don't want to take the thing over. I don't want to drive the bus. I don't want that responsibility. I think it happens best when I do less and when I just support the processes that are happening already.
Your final vision of every moment being drawn together in a torrent of genius to become something new, a human life. This speaks to your North Node, your growth edge, where you're walking towards, from intellectual analysis to integrated wisdom. How has your own life become the primary text for understanding these spiritual principles?
I think that everybody's life is the primary text for these spiritual principles. And my job is just to make it explicit, to bring to self-consciousness what it is that's happening already. It's that consciousness is becoming more conscious, more specific, more concrete, more refined. I'm doing that in my own life in terms of my relationship with my wife and my family, in terms of my career aspirations of bringing this Empyrean deck into the world and to people. Also, just practically, like what, as we were talking about earlier, we're moving out of the house. We're going to be moving into an RV, all 7 of us, right? I have 3 kids and 2 dogs. And we're all going to be living in this RV for at least a couple of months, if not longer, exploring the world and seeing different communities and different forms of life and trying to build a life for ourselves that is healthy, that's sane, that works for us as neurodivergent people, and that's sustainable.
How do you envision the Empyrean deck and your broader teaching continuing to serve the evolution of human consciousness?
I think that the patterns that we describe as archetypes just are the vessels or the channels or the modes or the paths by which spirit does what it does. That consciousness, as we experience it, really is a microcosm of the way the whole cosmos works. If you understand the principles of connection, if you understand what those patterns are, I think that the more awareness we all get about paying attention to the right kinds of things, right? That we can see anything if we look in the right direction, right? We can learn anything if we ask the right questions. I really do believe that about mind and about consciousness and about humanity, that any question that we can pose precisely enough, any question that we can ask in the right way, the universe will generate an answer for us in the language in which we ask the question, right? So having this language, having this sort of set of concepts and learning the language, it's meant simply to attune us to what's always happening already, but will help us do it better, help us do it more intentionally, more conscientiously, help us get the outcomes that we like and want rather than the outcomes that make us gnash our teeth and cry. Because we have that power, but we have that power not just as individuals, as communities, as societies, as cultures, as a planet. We all have to be on board with the project. That doesn't mean we have to have the same language, spirituality, religion, but we have to have the same conception in some broad sense of what being human is about. Our relationship is with the divine in some general sense, in some way in which we can become mutually comprehensible to one another, just enough so that we can work together. In the same way that I have to form my own life in which all of my desires are complementary and all of my needs are being met in a way that gives everybody a voice. That's what we need to do as a family, a community, the nation, and as a planet. We need to find those commonalities, those paths by which everybody really can have what they want. We live in a world of abundance. It's possible that everybody gets fed, everybody gets a place to stay, everybody gets a seat at the table. We have the resources. What we don't have is a common language. We're in a kind of Tower of Babel moment. We don't have a way of communicating to each other in such a way that we realize, wait a minute, on some level, we really do all want the same thing. And it really is possible that we can do it. Let's do it intentionally, carefully. Let's find those bridges, find those commonalities. The language embodied in the cards can help people do that. It's meant to be humanistic and universalistic.
I love these conversations. The more I speak to guests like yourself who give me the privilege and honor to look at your chart and the work you're doing, you bring it to life. The knowledge of what was written in your chart, what your soul signed up for, this sacred contract between your soul and the universe, for the work you came here to accomplish. And I see the Empyrean Deck is not separate from this contract. It's proof that you've remained faithful to your soul's deepest calling.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Where can people find you? And do you have any parting words at all?
People can find me at empyreanproject.com. That's the landing page. It's simple, but it has a quick introduction to the deck. It also has a link where within the next month or two, you'll be able to order your own copy of the deck and the kind of accoutrements that go with it. So I hope people will do that. And in terms of passing wisdom, boy, that's a tough question. The final bit of wisdom, I guess, would be that we can't understand our lives from within our own lives. The only way we can make sense of our lives is to find those larger networks within our lives, find those larger patterns and principles of which our lives are embodiments and manifestations. The only way we can make sense of our lives is to be able to step out of our lives, to see our lives from the outside and see the whole picture, the whole context, and see all of those interrelationships, networks, causes and effects that give our life a sense of meaning and value. It's actually not that hard to do. There are plenty of methods available. I would just encourage people to do that because it's so worthwhile, it's so enjoyable, it's exciting, and it makes the world a better place.
That's so well said, Asher. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for allowing me to look at your chart and to bring some of those facets, like a diamond, bringing a different light through that prism. How have you experienced the conversation today?
This was really delightful and unexpected. The way that you use your technology, your spiritual system is really effective. It helps ask really good questions and dig into really interesting and specific aspects of our projects and intentions. So thank you for that. I learned a lot. I appreciate being willing to share your gifts with me.